Okay, cool. Right. Hi, everyone. Sorry to keep you all waiting like this. Yeah, I just went up being a bit annoying. So like I said earlier, my name is Adnan. Senior Junior Education Officer for the year. I thought I'd leave some of my socials there, email address and stuff like that for you all to note down, potentially get in touch with. I'm going to click start, get going. Sorry, it's been a bit slow. All right, cool. So, what do we mean by decolonizing the curriculum? So there's tons of definitions out there. This is probably my favorite one. I think it's the most easy to understand as far as the definitions go. So to decolonize curriculum is to enhance the way we learn and what we learn, is to complement what is already in our curriculum with a multiplicity of perspectives, traditions, and approaches from different regions, historical texts, and academic disciplines. Fundamentally, it seeks to challenge, complement, and critique the inherently romanticized, Eurocentric nature of our curriculum. It is to present history for what it is and to encourage critical thought. I should say this is all paraphrased, and it was an academic by the name of Shampa Biswas, who's a professor of political science, who essentially came up with this definition. I'm just going to move on to the next slide. Okay, cool. So again, continuing with the theme of what we mean by decolonizing the curriculum, it was born out of what's now known as the Rhodes Must Fall movement in South Africa. I suppose a quick question: does anyone actually know who Rhodes or Cecil Rhodes is? You can just type it in the chat. Yeah. So for those of you who don't, Cecil Rhodes was an imperialist businessman who oversaw the vast colonization of land in southern Africa in the late 19th century, and that came, at the expense of many indigenous communities there, and they were often, treated as subpar and treated like second class citizens, and stuff like that. And the Rhodes Must Fall movement was really a call to kind of stop this kind of commemoration of him, this celebration of him, and to really acknowledge who he was, and what he did and what he represents. So that's why. And the whole point of Must Fall is to tear down the statues that were there to commemorate him. And one such example of tackling assumptions in our curriculum is for those of you who studied geography will see there's always this developed world separates what we know as the global north or the west and the global south. But what it seems to miss is that what we now call the developing world, the reason it's developing is in large part down to the historical injustice of colonialism, and that seems to be missed out there. The implication there is that somehow, some parts of the world are naturally what you would call unquote unquote developed, and some are naturally developing when that is not the case. There are political decisions which have led to the state of the world as it is. Just moving on to the next slide. Okay, cool. So why is it important? I suppose quick question actually before I go into this. Does anyone actually know what the BAME or Black Awarding Gap is? Interesting to know. Okay, so for those of you who don't, what the awarding gap basically is if we take the black awarding gap, for example, it looks at the number of black students who are being awarded a 2-1 or above in comparison to their white colleagues who are a 2-1 or above. So at Leicester, as of 2019, I believe something along the lines of 85% or 87%, I think it was, of white students at Leicester are being awarded a 2-1 or above, and something along the lines of 67 or 68% of black students are being awarded a 2-1 or above. Now, there are some who seem to think that this implies that, you know, somehow white students are more intelligent than black students. This is actually the case. The university have acknowledged it. Universities up and down the country have acknowledged it. The systemic factors within universities that contribute to, you know, white students disproportionately being awarded higher degree marks than their black and other minority ethnic counterparts. So yeah, so that's the stats for Leicester. In terms of why it's important, again, it's the first point, which is often thrown around. It's diversity authors with diversity of ideas, which I think is important. We just don't want diversity of authors for the sake of it, which I'll get into a bit later. Ensures that we have an education system and a curriculum that's constantly challenging prejudice and bigotry, as opposed to kind of education is really important to this. It's key to this. And also we'll go into it a bit later, but if you look at the study of science and the way science is upheld today as this objective kind of objective kind of subject, we fail to acknowledge how it's sort of come about historically and the consequences of that today. For example, the mortality rates of black women are far higher than their white counterparts. Why is that? Again, we'll look into that a bit later, either today or later on throughout the year. And again, as well as, you know, touched on the awarding gap and need to deal with that, but also it's about our incredibly diverse student community seeing themselves reflected in the curriculum, but also their histories, the way they came to be, the way education came to be, and, you know, having that sense of autonomy over that as well. Let's go on to the next slide. Sorry, just being a bit slow. Okay, cool. So I wanted to do a quick case study. Again, I know we're short on time, so you don't. Again, it can just be a quick tidy up, I guess. For me, I thought this would be a good case study to kind of get to grips with the difference between what's known as decolonization and what's known as diversity. So if we look at this case study, you can read the article in your own time. If you want the article, just drop me a message or email and I'll send it to you. Okay, that's fine. Thanks, Isaiah. So when it comes to measuring health, I suppose those of you who are particularly in the life sciences who study subjects in and around that area, you'll find that body mass index or BMI numbers are widely regarded as objective determinants. Given the historical developmental context of BMI as a white European measure, as you can briefly see in this article, I suppose I'd be interested to know what you might think the implications of this are, and thoughts on how approaches of diversity might differ to decolonization here. Does anyone have any thoughts they might want to type out? It's all right if you don't want to. I'll go into it a bit more in the next slide. Just give you a couple of seconds to see if anyone wants to respond. Okay, cool. No, that's fine. So essentially, what you'll find is when it comes to decolonizing the curriculum. Often it's conflated. So the concept of decolonization, the concept of diversity, they're often conflated with each other, when in reality they're two entirely different concepts and approaches. So if we, if we look at this issue, for example, the teaching of BMI, which is shown to be racist and exclusive, but also BMI as a tool, which isn't an accurate determinant of health for women of color, particularly as well. If we continue to enable this, we're enabling something that's actually detrimental to the health of large parts of the country. So if we approach this using the model of diversity, you would essentially have black and brown academics in this field of science essentially essentially teaching something that's actually quite flawed, problematic, and racist, and that doesn't actually deal with the issue at hand. Often people think diversity is a silver bullet, but actually in this case, if you had more black and brown people just teaching this, it wouldn't actually deal with the issue. It just kind of papers over the cracks. While decolonization will seek to address the systemic issue here, the systemic oppression at its root, which is in and of itself a form of oppression. So to decolonize would be to challenge the premise of BMI, not necessarily to get rid of it, but to challenge the premises, to critically analyze it and complement it with measures around the world. So yeah, I thought I would use that as a brief case study. I'll move on to the next slide. Apologies everyone, there's a bit of a time lag when the slides change. So yeah, I really like this quote. So Angela Davis is a really famous civil rights and academic. If you like reading into this stuff, I'd really recommend looking at the works of Angela Davis. She does some really cool stuff. But I really like this quote. I have a hard time accepting diversity as a synonym for justice. Diversity is a corporate strategy. It's a strategy designed to ensure that the institution functions in the same way that it functioned before, except now that you have some black faces and brown faces. It's a different that doesn't make a difference. Does anyone have any thoughts on this quote? Again, you don't have to if you don't want to. I'd be interested to know if you did. Just drop it in the chat if you want. But yeah, I think this sums it up quite nicely. How often, you might see in light of what happened to George Floyd. You'll see a lot of companies now, saying, oh, okay, we need to diversify our boards and stuff like that. And I'm not necessarily dismissing the importance of that entirely. I get the argument that obviously people like to see themselves reflected. However, is that dealing with the issue at hand? Is that addressing these issues? That's the question that needs to be asked. So I think it's really interesting when Angela Davis says it's a difference that doesn't make a difference. Anyway, I'll move on to the next slide. Cool. So how do we decolonize education? What can you do? So I suppose what I would say is decolonization, the actual process of it in the context of university and education, it's far more than just the curriculum. Although the curriculum is one aspect of it, and that's what we're touching on today. You will get the opportunity to actually visit another workshop by my colleague Malak, who will touch on grassroots activism and talk about and what that means. So I won't get into it too much, but it is far more than just the curriculum. But yeah, these suggestions here, I feel like are just the start of what can be done and how we can seek to decolonize education. So what does a decolonized curriculum look like, or starts to look like? Touched on earlier, diversity of reading lists and lecturers with diversity of ideas, which is the important thing. There's no point having black and brown academics for the sake of it if there's no challenge to the status quo. And what does that challenge to the status quo look like? Well, it's having modules themes of learning and empowerment, which actively challenge and complement mainstream theories, modules. You may have heard of this training module called unconscious bias training, which all staff are mandated to take, and I think students as well potentially. I'm not entirely sure, but I know all staff are. And it's essentially, the whole idea behind it is, staff. Some staff members may have an unconscious bias. We all have an unconscious bias towards certain groups, and we take the training to kind of. The idea behind it is that we do the training to kind of address it, basically. I think it's a bit problematic, the term unconscious bias, because is the bias unconscious? I'm not quite sure. Is it actually addressing the hand? I'm not quite sure. But point, and it's the question to ask, really, are staff members taking that? It's not a silver bullet to the issue, but it is a starting point, I think. And again, having a medicine and practice of science that factors in the cultural needs and contributions of people of color from around the globe. And also, part of this is ensuring that learning and research that is done on campus actively reflects on what impact the research has on society and what potential consequences there may be. In terms of what you can do, pushing for regular reviews of reading lists and module content, module reviews, you will have the opportunity at the end of each module to reviews during your study of that module, as well as at the end of it, might be a way of incorporating change in a quicker way. Make sure that there's a push for student representation within your school on college learning and teaching committees, school learning and teaching committees. These bodies essentially kind of set the terms of how education is done within each school and college. Ensure that module reviews have questions on belonging and representation. Work closely with one of our volunteer reps, who they are called Equality and Liberation Champions. You'll find out more about this later on in the day, I'm sure. And ensuring that their voices are heard on student staff committees. Again, another body. And within your learning space, ask who has and hasn't got access to the learning space you are in. This could look like, if you look at the lecture theatre, some lecture theatres may not have wheelchair access. Some lectures that are online, when they're uploaded online, they may not have subtitles and captions. That's an access need. They're all access needs. When it comes to the teaching of slavery or something that's quite harsh or genocide, that's quite traumatic. It's quite triggering. So our academics are teaching that in a way that's sensitive to the experience of students. Trigger warnings, and even with that, if we take, we're in Black History Month, like if we take slavery, for example, Black history is far more than just slavery. You can't just put slavery and or the civil rights in the curriculum and say, yeah, I've done my bit. So there's lots of questions around there to ask, and also organize with your students on your course. That's the most powerful thing you can do, and that involves several different methods. Again, Malak will go into it if and when you get the opportunity to go onto their workshop. And yeah, it involves several different methods depending on the context, and Students' Union will be able to provide you with support with any of that. Sorry. So yeah, in terms of campaigns, events, and how to get involved. Like I said, we're in Black History Month now. That's being led by Liberation Officer Tony Bagaya. And it's called We Are Black History because Black History is far more than just a month. It's going to be a year-long campaign with things happening throughout the year. In terms of actually getting involved with work around decolonizing the curriculum and decolonization, towards the end of the month, we will be launching Let's Decolonize, which will be a student-led campaign aimed at decolonizing education. That'll be launched in a couple of weeks. And again, that'll be a really, really key way of you. And if you have any questions, again, my email address is at the front of this. I'll drop it in the chat. And Isaiah is here as well. So if Isaiah can pass that on as well, but I will drop it in the chat. And the last slide really is just recommended reading on my part. It's quite brief. Sorry, it's been a bit slow. Yeah, so this is just some reading that I personally would recommend. it's not that extensive. We will be producing a reading list around decolonization soon, and it'll be a bit more official website stuff. And yeah, I think it's important that we learn as we engage in this practice. But thanks very much, everyone. I really appreciate your time. This will be recorded, I guess, for the later session. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Please get in touch with any questions you may have and stuff like that. And I guess I'll leave it there. Shall I hand over to you, Isaiah?